investors, I'm Phan and welcome to another episode of Phanance, where I keep you plugged into the markets. This week, we're talking about growth in Europe pumping its brakes, and then the ongoing trade beef between China and the US. So let's do this. So let's check in with the markets this past week. Here's the 5-day chart with the S&P, Dow, and the NASDAQ. As you can see, the market kept creeping up at the beginning of the week since it was still pretty giddy about the Fed's decision last Wednesday to stop raising interest rates. But then wham, on Thursday, the market gets dog-walked. What the heck happened? Two things. The European Commission lowered its outlook on economic growth of Europe. And then the White House came out and said that they're still a long ways from shaking hands with China on a trade deal. On Thursday, the European Commission issued its winter economic forecast report, which takes the pulse of the European economy. The European Commission is made up of representative countries like Germany, France, and Italy. And its job is to propose new laws, enforce them, and keep an eye on what the EU spends its money on. It also issues reports to update the world on the health of the European economy. Last autumn, the EC was expecting Europe to grow at 1.9%. But last week, they lowered that outlook to 1.3%. Slowing growth in other countries worries US investors because it makes it harder for those countries to buy stuff from the good old US of A. So data out of Europe bums folks out. But to pour even more salt on the market's wounds, the White House said that the presidents of the US and China won't be able to meet by the deadline that they had previously set to resolve the trade dispute. Remember, the number one worry on investors' minds today is the trade beef between the US and China. What's this beef about? Did China drop a diss track on the US? The White House is pissed about two things. One, it thinks that the US buys too much stuff from China and China doesn't buy enough stuff back from us. And two, the White House thinks that China doesn't play fair when it comes to business practices because when a US business sets up in China, it basically has to hand over all its trade secrets. Cool. I'm up to speed on the beef, but why does it even matter? What's the big deal with higher tariffs? Well, because tariffs are essentially a tax on stuff that gets imported into the US. So you know that shirt you're wearing or the smartphone in your hand? Well, all that stuff could get a lot more expensive. And who wants to pay more for stuff? Classic economics says if things get more expensive, people buy less of it. And if people buy less stuff, businesses make less money, and that could motivate them to lay off workers. And people losing jobs is not good for morale or the economy. Okay. Back to the market moving event. On Thursday, the White House came out and said two things that shook the markets. One, the White House official came out and said that there's still a sizable distance to go on the trade talks with China. And then a second official came out and said that it was highly unlikely that a meeting between the two presidents would happen by March 2nd, which was the deadline that was previously agreed upon. Because of these two comments, this happened. So the news this week wasn't too encouraging. What should you do? Well, if you ask me, I'd sit tight. I think a trade deal will eventually get done, though I have no idea if it's going to happen before the March 2nd deadline. But my sense is that President Trump is highly motivated to strike a deal because a strong economy and rising stock market are super important to him to boost his popularity. So I think he'll do what it takes to do a deal or at least push out the deadline. Either way, I wouldn't panic and I'd stay invested. All right. Hope you found this week's episode helpful. If so, hit that like button. And if you have some investment thoughts of your own, leave a comment below. And then while you're down there, tap that subscribe button and stay plugged into the markets with me. Until next week, stay up and invest wisely.
Please try not to cry on me. Now that all my dreams are manifesting, faces even big.